Hey guys, tonight we ride straight into the smoky, gritty, and occasionally questionable kitchens of the Wild West, where saloons served up mystery meat, outlaw stew, and enough black coffee to wake the dead. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps a ton and makes sure you never miss another strange, savory story from history. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's listening while the world sleeps. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because in the old frontier, breakfast wasn't just the most important meal of the day. It was often the last thing cooked before a gunfight. The dish that didn't pretend. A tale of cornmeal mush with tallow drizzle. The wind came down from the mountains like it had a grudge. Cold, sharp, loud enough to rattle the tin roof of the split-toothed saloon and whisper through every crack in the boards. Most nights, cowboys laughed through it. Others cursed. But on that particular evening, they just leaned in closer to their tin plates and held their spoons like they were gold. Because in that saloon on that night, nobody was talking. They were eating cornmeal mush with tallow drizzle, a meal so plain, so brutally simple, that even the most hardened poker player had the decency to shut up while chewing it. No one ordered it just appeared when it needed to. And tonight, they needed it bad. The mine had collapsed 2 days before, trapping 4 men and killing 3 mules. The rescue team had worked non-stop. No sleep, no food, just coffee and prayers and grit. They pulled the last survivor out that morning, coughing dust and blinking like he hadn't seen the sun in years. May, the same woman whose pot pies kept this town standing, had watched from the kitchen doorway, apron dusted with flour and coal smoke. She didn't ask questions. She just made mush. Cornmeal mush was a dish that didn't pretend no shine. No sugar. No clever tricks. Just boiled cornmeal in water or milk, stirred slow over a low fire until it thickened like lava, then poured into battered tin pans to cool and set. Later, she sliced it thick, like bricks, and pan-fried each piece in pork fat until the edges went gold and crisp. Then came the drizzle, beef tallow, still hot from the pan, sometimes with a pinch of salt, sometimes black pepper if there was any left. No herbs, no garnish, just heat and hunger, and what you could scrape from a PN.it was food built for men who hadn't slept, who hadn't cried even after digging up friends with their bare hands. It didn't ask you to feel anything.it just filled you. May didn't say a word when she passed out the plates, just walked from table to table, laying them down like gravestones. "Eat," she said once, and they did point one cowboy, Dirty Hank, who'd once bitten a man's ear off in a knife fight, took a bite, chewed slow, and whispered, "Tastes like not dying." No one laughed. Because he was right. Cornmeal mush wasn't about taste. It was about presence. About saying, "I'm still here. I still got teeth. I still got strength enough to hold this fork and swallow this slab and maybe go back out tomorrow." Some said the dish came from back east. Some said the slaves taught it to the settlers. Others swore it was stolen from a Cherokee woman who could make it sing with just salt and sunlight. May never told. All she said was, "If you can't afford anything else, you can afford mush." And they all could. That winter, when snow covered the tracks and the rail deliveries stopped, May made mush every damn day for 3 weeks. No bread, no meat, just cornmeal she'd stashed under the floorboards and the rendered tallow from the last cow slaughtered before the freeze. People survived off that mush. Cowboys, children, the saloon girls, even the sheriff, who once said he'd rather eat his boots, and then ate 3 helpings of it with tears in his beard. May didn't judge. She just kept cooking. The trick, she once whispered to a young girl helping in the kitchen, wasn't the mush. It's the patience. Mush teaches you how to wait. You stir it slow, let it bubble, then you pour it and walk away. Don't poke it. Don't rush it. Let it be. Same with people, she said. Same with grief. That lesson stuck. Especially on nights like this. After the plates were cleared and the fire burned low, one of the miners, Big Jed, pushed back his chair and said, "You ever think we'd be grateful for mush?" The room nodded in silence. Then May looked up and said, "You're not grateful for the mush. You're grateful you've still got a table to eat it on." Nobody argued. A few days later, when the preacher came by to say words for the dead, he skipped the sermon and asked if May had any more mush. She did. She always did. Some men swore it had healing powers, said it lined your insides like armor, that if you ate enough of it, bullets couldn't find your heart. Others said it was just cornmeal and cow fat. But they kept eating it. Years later, after the mine closed and the town shrank and the railroad moved west, folks still talked about that mush. Some tried to copy it in fancy kitchens. They added cheese, or herbs, or, God forbid, truffle oil. But it never tasted the same, because they didn't need it like the folks of Split Tooth had. They didn't know what it meant to eat something that asked nothing from you but trust. Trust that it would fill you up, carry you through the cold, and give you one more day. And when May finally passed, they didn't put flowers on her grave. They left ladles and one perfect square of cornmeal mush, wrapped in a napkin, still warm from the skillet. The feast that stopped the cards. A tale of wild turkey and dumplings. The cards were midair when the smell hit the room. The hand of 5 floated like autumn leaves through a shaft of dusty saloon light. 2 kings, a queen, and 1 jack of spades caught in a slow-motion tumble toward the floor. The gambler who'd thrown them, a wiry, sunburned man with a scar across one eyebrow, froze halfway through cussing out his opponent. His mouth hung open, eyes narrowed, head turned slowly toward the source of the interruption. It wasn't gunpowder, it wasn't whiskey, it was wild turkey and dumplings. And every man in the Silver Bucket Saloon turned like they just smelled heaven drag a wagon through the door. May, the saloon cook who everyone quietly called Ma'am, whether they meant to or not, emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray that looked more like a battlefield than a serving platter. 5 battered bowls clinked against each other like soldiers in formation. Steam rose like a holy fog. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The table closest to the stove cleared itself without a word. May set down the bowls like blessings. Thick broth the color of amber sloshed gently with every step, filled with shredded turkey, wild herbs, and big pillowy dumplings that looked like clouds had fallen into a pot and decided to stay. The smell of black pepper, bay, and something vaguely woodsy, maybe sage, wrapped around the saloon like a blanket. This wasn't just food. This was Sunday supper on a Tuesday night in the middle of nowhere, and it made grown men weep. Wild turkey wasn't easy to come by. Not in a town like Cripple Hollow, where folks mostly ate beans, dried apples, and whatever creature had the bad luck to wander too close to a bored cowboy with a rusty rifle. But May had a secret. She knew how to trap turkeys. Not hunt, trap. She built snares near the creek, baited them with old cornbread, and waited. Then she did something rarer. She cooked the damn things right. Most men boiled turkey meat until it turned to rope. But May, she simmered it slow, hours, with garlic, wild onions, salt she traded a bottle of sassafras syrup for. Then, when the meat gave up all resistance, she shredded it by hand, whispered something over the pot, some say a prayer, some say a threat, and dropped in her dumplings. They weren't pretty. They weren't perfect, but they puffed up like biscuits trying to reach salvation, soaking up every drop of broth like they were born for it. The first time she made it, Sheriff Eli McGraw tasted it, stood up mid-meal, took off his hat and said, "I could marry this stew." May didn't flinch. She just handed him a spoonful more and said, "It wouldn't have you." Everyone laughed, but only because their mouths were full of the warmest thing they'd tasted in months. Wild turkey and dumplings changed things in town. At IT made men linger. Gamblers who'd normally vanish after payday stayed 2 nights longer, just in case May's making that stew again. Drifters who wouldn't look a soul in the eye started tipping their hats and offering to chop wood in exchange for a bowl. Even the preacher, who once said saloons were Satan's side porch, started stopping by around dinner, talking about checking on the moral health of the staff. Moral health, of course, being a euphemism for dumplings. The best nights were when May added extra garlic and wild thyme, harvested from the riverbank. The broth took on a depth that made some swear they could taste stories in it, like the broth remembered things, like it had a past. And when the dumplings melted just right into the meat, it wasn't dinner. It was resurrection. One winter, when the town doctor fell sick and couldn't eat solids, May made a thinner version, just broth and turkey. No dumplings. The doctor drank it from a mug. 3 days later, he was out of bed and delivering babies. May didn't claim credit, but everyone else did. They started calling it medicine soup, bottled it, sent it on stagecoaches. There were rumors that a gold prospector in Deadwood recovered from pneumonia just by sniffing a napkin soaked in May's turkey broth. And while no one could confirm that, nobody was willing to test the theory. Of course, not everyone appreciated it. One East Coast lawyer, fresh from Boston, wearing a coat too clean for that part of the world, bit into a dumpling and sniffed, "This is rustic." May nodded once, turned back to the stove, and quietly never served him again. That man left town 2 days later with his briefcase, a bruised ego, and no clue that he'd just insulted the soul of Cripple Hollow, because that's what wild turkey and dumplings had become. Not a recipe. A ritual. There was one night nobody forgot. The night the cards stopped midair. The gambler with the eyebrow scar, the one who'd been ready to start a shootout over a crooked hand, took one bite of the stew, paused, and then laid his gun gently on the table. He said, "Fellas, I think I found God." The room didn't laugh. They nodded and kept eating. Years later, when May passed, the town held a wake in the saloon and no preacher. No hymns, just a row of bubbling pots, each one filled with her signature stew, and no one spoke above a whisper. They didn't need to. Every bite told the story. The story of a woman who tamed wild birds, wild men, and wild times with one pot, 2 hands, and a recipe older than memory. And even now, when the wind cuts down from the hills and the trees creak like they remember something they can't quite say, you can almost smell it. Wild turkey, garlic, dumplings that taste like forgiveness. The pie that could bring you home. A Wild West tale of dried apple pie. The desert didn't give many second chances. Horses limped, guns jammed, boots split at the sole just when you hit gravel. And if you were lucky enough to ride into town with your skin intact and coins still in your pocket, Chances were high the saloon would offer little more than beans, gristle, and the kind of coffee that made strong men weep. But every so often, if you hit the right place at the right time, there was pie. Not just any pie. Dried apple pie. Made from fruit that hadn't seen a tree in years but still carried the ghost of orchards and seasons and summer nights so sweet they could break am.it was the back-end saloon in Dry Fork, New Mexico territory. A mining town so dusty you could lose your past walking down Main Street. Folks didn't come here to stay, they came to forget. But even the most jaded, scarred-up drifter would pause when they saw that little chalkboard out front. Dried apple pie. Hot. 1 slice per man. No one knew exactly when the pie tradition started. Some said it was Miss Ellie, the owner's late wife, who baked the first batch during the winter of '71, when the snows fell fast and even whiskey froze in the bottle. Others claimed it was old Gus, the barkeep who'd learned the recipe from his mother back in Virginia, where apple seasons were marked by bonfires and fiddle tunes, not cactus and coyotes. Either way, once a week, always at sundown, someone would hang that sign. And that was when the saloon changed. Men straightened their backs, took their boots off at the door. Hats were removed, not by rule, but out of respect. It wasn't just pie. It was a moment, a chance, a memory disguised as dessert. The apples, dried and wrinkled as a preacher's knuckles, came in burlap sacks by train. They'd be soaked for hours in hot water, softening until they remembered who they used to be. Then came cinnamon, nutmeg, a spoonful of brown sugar if Gus had any, and a splash of whiskey when he didn't. The crust? That was made from flour, lard, and pure stubbornness. Rolled thick, strong enough to hold together in a saddlebag or a miner's fist. No butter, no fancy crimped edges, just a top and a bottom, pressed together with a fork older than the town itself. Baked in cast iron pans over coals, served in dented tin plates. Hot enough to burn your mouth, sweet enough to make you miss someone you hadn't thought about in years. There was a boy once, no older than 16, who'd walked 100 miles with blistered feet and a letter from his mother folded in his coat. He hadn't cried since Kansas, but one bite of that pie, and he dropped the fork, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Tastes like home." No one asked questions, just nodded. That's what dried apple pie was. It was the great pause in the Wild West. A moment between gunfights and gallows where a man could sit down and remember something soft. It wasn't always perfect. Some weeks the apples were too dry. Other weeks the sugar ran out. There was even one disastrous evening when Gus mistook salt for flour and the whole batch came out tasting like tears and disappointment. But even then, nobody raised their voice, because it wasn't about perfection. It was about trying to bring back the taste of a time when life wasn't about dust and debt and dying before 30. Trying to remind everyone that even out here, where nothing grew and everything hurt, there were still things worth baking. One winter, a stagecoach got snowed in just outside town. The passengers stumbled into the saloon half-frozen, including a Boston banker's wife in gloves worth more than the building she was standing in. She wrinkled her nose at the furniture, sniffed at the whiskey. Then Gus placed a slice of warm apple pie in front of her. She took one bite, didn't speak for a full minute. Then she looked around, eyes soft, and said, "My grandmother used to make this." Nobody said a word. The saloon, for one breathless moment, became a cathedral. When Ellie passed, they tried to stop making the pie. It didn't seem right, folks said, like singing a song without the tune. But a week later, a ranch hand named Jesse brought in a new sack of dried apples. Quiet kid, never spoke much, just handed Gus the bundle and said she wouldn't want it to stop. Gus made the crust that night with tears in the dough. The pie came out darker than usual, a little crooked at the edges, but it was the best they'd ever tasted. They called it Ellie's batch, and from then on, every last slice had her name on it. There were rules, of course, 1 slice per and second helpings. You couldn't buy more. You couldn't bribe Gus. Once the batch was gone, it was gone, and if you missed it, you waited until next week like everybody else. The regulars used to say that pie slices were like Sunday sermons. You didn't need more than one, and you were a fool if you showed up late. One night, a card cheat from Amarillo tried to steal a second slice while Gus was in the back. Nobody stopped him. Not right away, but as he raised the fork to his mouth, 5 chairs scraped back in unison. The room went quiet. The piano player stopped mid-ragtime tune. He looked up. 10 men stared back. All of them with forks in hand, plates licked clean, pie crumbs still fresh on their beards. The cheat put the fork down, walked out the door, didn't come back. Years later, when the railroad moved west and Dry Fork became a ghost town, people still talked about the pie. The new towns had fancy cafes, imported butter, even peach cobblers. But they didn't have that pie. They didn't have Ellie or Gus, or the way the saloon smelled when the first slice hit the plate and the cinnamon curled into the floorboards like incense. One prospector wrote a letter home from Nevada that said, "Found gold, maybe, but I'd trade it for one more taste of that apple pie from Dry Fork." There's an old stove still standing where the saloon used to be, charred, empty. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, folks say you can smell apples and cinnamon drifting across the valley. Like someone's still baking. Like the past doesn't ever quite die. Not when it tasted that good. Hot and good. A Wild West tale of Johnny Cakes. There were rules in the Wild West. Some written, most not. But one of the oldest, whispered over poker tables and passed down from bunkhouse to bunkhouse, went like this: judge a cook by his Johnny Cakes, not by his stew, not by how strong he brewed the coffee, not even by how clean he kept his cast iron. No, sir. A real cook, a trail cook, a saloon fryman, a desert biscuit master, earned his reputation one corn cake at a time. Because Johnny Cakes were the measure of a man. Simple, fast, honest. And when made right. Hot and good. It started long before the first gun was fired in Tombstone or the first poker hand dealt in Deadwood. The recipe had roots in native kitchens, passed from indigenous hands to settlers, from settlers to cowboys, from cowboys to barkeeps and saloon cooks who could flip a cake with one hand while reaching for the shotgun with the other. Just 3 ingredients: cornmeal, boiling water, a pinch of salt. Maybe bacon grease if you were lucky. No yeast. No sugar. No fluff. Just batter, heat, and grit. The kind that stuck in your teeth and your soul. The Timberhorn Saloon in the Wyoming Territory. They made Johnny Cakes every morning before the sun cracked the mountains. The cook, a broad-shouldered woman named Mags, had arms like tree trunks and a voice like a broken fiddle. She'd slam the griddle down over red-hot coals, spit to test the heat, and start ladling batter with a scoop fashioned from a buffalo horn to be by the time the first drinker wandered in. Boots muddy, eyes hollow, maybe still bleeding from last night. There'd already be a stack of cakes sizzling. "You want whiskey, you eat first," Mags would growl, and no man ever dared skip breakfast twice. They weren't pretty. The edges curled, sometimes burned. The bottoms came out darker than a miner's fingernails. Some were thick as boot soles, others thin as playing cards. But they were hot, always hot, crisp outside, gritty inside. And when Mags felt generous, she'd throw on a spoonful of sorghum or molasses. Whatever came cheapest off the last rail car. That's when things got quiet, real quiet, at a room full of outlaws, drifters, gamblers, and lawmen all chewing in peace. The only sound the clink of tin forks on metal plates and the occasional sigh that said more than words ever could. Once, a traveling preacher from Illinois wandered in, robes dust-covered and hat limp. He ordered one Johnny cake, then another, then 3 more. By the end of the meal, he looked up at Mags, crumbs on his collar, and said, "Ma'am, that cake just saved my soul." Mags didn't blink, just slapped another one on the griddle and muttered, "Hope it sticks this time." Out on the trail, Johnny cakes were survival. Wrapped in cloth and tucked into saddle bags, they kept for days. Some men used them as coasters for coffee. Others used them as bartering chips. One Johnny cake could trade you a shave, a shirt, or a secret. The real old-timers carried them like gold. A man named Tully, who once rode from Missouri to Santa Fe without stopping, claimed he survived 6 days with nothing but 2 Johnny cakes and a tin of lard. When someone asked him what that tasted like, he said, "Pride and regret, mostly pride. They were the edible plate of the frontier." Stew? Pour it over a Johnny cake. Beans? Mop 'em up with a Johnny cake. Salt pork? Stack it high like a sandwich and eat it while you ride. They didn't crumble, didn't tear, and didn't demand manners. You could eat them with your fingers or stab them with a knife. Depending on your mood point, one cowboy carved his sweetheart's name into the crust of every cake he made. Another would eat one before every duel. Said it brought him luck, that he won 4 in a row. Lost the 5th. Children knew them too. In smaller towns, you'd see a barefoot kid running out of the saloon kitchen with a Johnny cake in both hands, shouting about gold mines and outlaws as crumbs trailed behind him. For many frontier babies, it was the first solid food they ever gnawed. Soaked in milk, or gravy, or dipped in honey when a jar could be found, and old men, toothless and slow, would mash them into mush and whisper stories about Johnny cakes their mama used to make, with ash-baked crusts and smoke-touched edges, back when the fire was in the dirt and you had to chase chickens off the flour sack. Of course, there were disputes. Some said the real way was to fry them in bear fat. Others swore by pork drippings. A few southern riders insisted they should be thin and crisp like cornmeal lace. Northerners wanted them thick and chewy, and in one notorious incident in Cheyenne, 2 men pulled pistols over whether molasses should go on top or be cooked inside the batter. Neither survived the debate, but at the Timber Horn, none of that mattered. Mags didn't take requests. You got your Johnny cake the way she made it, or you didn't get one at all. Once, a fancy city gent with gloves and a monocle sat at the bar and asked for a dab of jam, if you please. Mags stared at him like he'd spoken in Latin. Then she reached under the bar, slapped down a cake so hard his monocle jumped, and said, "There's your dab." He ate it, then asked for 2 more. Years passed. Towns rose and fell. Railroads carved through the plains like thunder on iron wheels. But Johnny cakes didn't change. Not in the recipe. Not in the meaning. They were there when land was staked, duels were fought, and hearts were broken. They were served after funerals, before weddings, during hangings, and at births. The cowboy poet Levi Boone once wrote, "A man can ride for miles on half a song and 1 good Johnny cake." And he meant it. When Mags passed, they held the wake in the saloon. No flowers, just a long table covered in nothing but cornmeal, salt, and a bucket of hot water. Each mourner stepped up, mixed a bit of batter, and slapped a cake onto the griddle to be sundown. The whole town smelled of smoke and memory, and one by one, they ate in silence. No drinks, no cards, no shooting. Just Johnny cakes. Hot and good. You can still find them today, tucked into old recipe books, rebranded as cornmeal flatbreads or heritage griddle cakes. But if you ask an old cowboy, the kind with sun-split boots and hands like sandpaper, what they really are, he'll just nod slow and say, "They're what kept us alive." Then he'll bite into one, close his eyes, and remember the warmth of a saloon, the hiss of the griddle, and the sound of Mags cussing under her breath as another day in the West began with the simplest, most stubborn food ever made. In the Old West, food wasn't just fuel. It was identity, and among the many dishes that wandered onto a cowboy's plate, few caused more raised eyebrows, hushed respect, or fork-wielding loyalty than one humble, misunderstood masterpiece. Cow tongue. Not jerky. Not beans. Not squirrel stew or sourdough flapjacks, and tongue boiled, peeled, seared, and drowned in brown gravy so thick it could patch a saddle. They said if you walked into a saloon and saw tongue in gravy chalked on the backboard, you were either in the company of a real cook or a man about to lie through his teeth about where he got the beef. Because tongue wasn't trail food. It wasn't something you hacked up at midnight over a campfire. It took time, skill, patience, which meant only saloons that had their act together could pull it off. One such place. A dusty, half-leaning watering hole tucked beside the Rio Pecos called the Lucky Slice. Its owner, a wiry woman named Dell Jones, had a scar down one cheek from a knife fight with a customer who said her gravy tasted too refined. That man now limped noticeably when he crossed the street. Dell's cow tongue dish was legend. You didn't just order it. You earned it. Preparation began at dawn. The tongue, usually from a steer big enough to shade a mule, was lowered into a cauldron with onions, salt, cracked pepper, and bay leaves. Some said she whispered to it. Others swore she growled. Then came the wait. 5 hours of slow boil, during which regulars would peek in the kitchen like superstitious gamblers watching their lucky dice being carved from bone. When the pot finally hissed its last breath of steam, Dell would hoist the tongue onto a wooden board, grab her paring knife, and peel the skin. A single, practiced motion that left it gleaming like mahogany. Then came the sear. Hot skillet, pork fat, and a touch of spice. Crust outside, velvet within. But it was the gravy. Oh Lord, the gravy. That made tongues wag. Dell started her gravy with the drippings, added flour until it bubbled like lava, stirred in onion broth, a spoon of blackstrap molasses, a pinch of coffee grounds, and a dash of mystery, and no one knew what else she put in. Someone once tried to peek. He didn't come back. The dish arrived on a heavy tin plate, still steaming, slices of tongue fanned out like poker cards, drowning under that rich, dark sauce on the side. Mashed taters or fried apples if it was Sunday, maybe cornbread if you'd paid your tab. The first bite. Silence. Always. Men who could shout down a stagecoach robbery would go mute as that meat hit their tongue. Tender. Earthy. With a melt that slid down your throat like it had somewhere to be. Some scoffed. Sure. Tongue? That's awful. Dell would tilt her head. Then I suppose your mouth is too. The locals loved it. Town marshals ordered it for their birthday. Gamblers ate it before high-stake hands, claiming it sharpened their bluff. One love-struck blacksmith claimed his wife proposed because of that dish. She later clarified it was actually the gravy. Even travelers took notice. A rail magnate once stopped by the Lucky Slice while waiting for his private car to refuel. He tried the tongue, bought a trainload of Dell's gravy. Word spread like wildfire across the territories. Not about Dell, not about the saloon, but about that one sacred phrase, tongue in gravy, hot, extra ladle. It became a code in frontier slang. If someone told you they had a plan that was tongue in gravy, it meant it was solid, rich, dependable. If a cowboy said a woman looked like tongue in gravy, he meant she was unforgettable and slightly intimidating. Even in duels, a man might mutter under his breath, "Time for some tongue in gravy," as he cocked the hammer, ready to face death the way a man should. Seasoned, not starved, but not everyone appreciated the delicacy. A new deputy in town once turned pale when the dish landed in front of him. "What part of the cow is this?" he asked Dell. "The part that would have warned you not to ask," she replied. He took one bite. He finished the plate. He ordered more. Behind the flavor was something deeper. Memory. For many, it tasted like a proper meal their mama once made before she vanished into the prairie fog. Or like a Sunday back in Georgia where someone cared enough to cook slow. And for cowboys who spent weeks gnawing jerky, beans, or whatever critter they managed to trap, that gravy-covered slab of muscle tasted like forgiveness. Dell passed eventually, died stirring gravy on a cold morning, smiling like she'd just heard a secret from the pot. They buried her with her skillet and a folded recipe card no one dared open. The new cook tried his best. Bless him. He followed the steps. He boiled, peeled, seared, mixed. But the gravy never hit the same. People whispered the recipe had a soul, and when Dell went, it followed. Now and then, someone in a modern diner or reenactment cook-off tries to bring it back. Cow tongue in gravy, they say proudly, smiling in their clean aprons and health-inspected kitchens, but old-timers shake their heads. It ain't right if you don't hear the hiss of the cast iron, and it ain't right if the cook doesn't threaten to stab you if you insult her roux. And that's fair. Because in the Wild West, cow tongue in gravy wasn't just a meal. It was a testament. To patience. To skill. To making something fine out of something others threw away. To remembering that sometimes the richest things come from the roughest cuts.